This fictional tale is dedicated to all those who had to live through similar events, in one way or another, for the peace of mankind. Thick clouds laden with rain obscured the evening sky that surrounded the tower of a fort. Lady Dara, ruler over a great land, stood upon the tower and was embraced by the cold wind. She was deeply saddened by the decision of the great king, ruler over every kingdom of the world, that her loved one, a man from her court, wasn't noble enough to take the seat beside her. The great king grumbled, "A plain sergeant as a king. Get him away. He shall mate with people of his kind." She could have dealt with that decision and, despite great sorrow, could have looked for another husband. However, she was experiencing a child from her loved guitar. So she stood in the wind and rain upon the stone tower, gazed into the distance, and held Qatar's hand. "Idara, please listen to me. Our love is by no means cut short by this decision. Of course, I'd hoped that I could rule at your side officially, but I'm not forbidden to choose to be as close to you whenever possible. Something else, however, troubles me, the child. Where should it grow up? In which position will it end up? Will it know about its origin? I think it would be best to hand it a foster mother, where it can have an untroubled childhood and then free from the trouble at the court. But Qatar, we can't just give it away, it's our child. I will give birth to it, and I surely want to see it grow up and care for it, instead of giving it to strangers. Idara, I know your desires are well and understand your point, but how do you want to do it? How do you want to raise our child without having a husband? The court wouldn't accept it, and neither the great king. You can't imagine the trouble it would cause. As a compromise, let's give it to a foster mother at our court. That way we can spend as much time with it as possible while avoiding the big trouble." That was the agreement they made, and soon they found a good foster mother at the court, a maid and a cook, whom the gods refused the gift of fertility. She was a very trustworthy woman, and was enormously grateful to finally be able to raise a child on her own. She promised to keep the situation a secret, and to care for the child like for her own, as if he was her own. Finally, Idara gave birth to a girl, and they named her Nazethi. It soon showed that she was an intelligent child, always curious, and always looking for adventures. She enjoyed playing with the other children, but often got in fights, which she usually won. Qatar soon had the idea to recruit Nazethi for the city guard someday. When both Idara and him realized that Nazethi was somewhat wild character remained as she got older, Idara reluctantly agreed. Full of joy to finally learn to wield proper weapons, Nazethi practiced a lot and soon became the best of the apprentice group. But her talent didn't flourish without envy from others. 2 sons of the court's blacksmith and brewmaster couldn't stand that girl, and even one from a low class was ahead of them in the training of the guards. They tried to complain about her on various things to Sergeant Qatar, but he seemed to like her a lot and cared little for the 2 angry boys. When Nazethi won the Archers tournament, they finally lost their temper. On the way home from the training yard, they ambushed her and pulled her into a nearby barn where they tied her up. They shouted at her, broke her bow, bent her sword, and to remind her of all times that someone like her has no place at the guard, heated the tip of her sword and tried to brand her arm with it. At that point, Nazethi lost her mind and unconsciously cast a forbidden spell, which threw the brewmaster's son away with such tremendous force that he smashed back first through the wooden planks at the end of the barn, and landed on the street, heavily wounded. Some peasants heard and saw this, rushed to the scene and called for the guards. It was without any doubt that Nazethi used the forbidden spell, which was usually punished by execution. In the light of this, the misbehavior of the boys was disregarded, but as Nazethi was just 15 winters of age, he couldn't possibly have learnt the spell by herself, and so the execution was ruled out. However, this led to to the assumption that her mother, the maid of the court, must have taught her the secret spell, as it was not uncommon for witches to secretly pass on their knowledge disguised as a form of self-defence. And so it was decided by the committee, led by Lady Dara, that the mother was to be executed by burning on the stake. As a sign of rejection of this sinful witchcraft, it was ruled that Nazethi herself should light the fire and burn her own mother. Without any form of escape, and with tearing eyes, Nazethi went to the stake that fateful day, holding a flaming torch in her hand. She looked at the face of her supposed mother and fulfilled that unbearable task only the cruelest minds could have imposed on her by lighting the stake. She also lighted an unextinguishable hatred in herself, hatred towards herself for doing all this and for not having joined her mother in the flames, a hatred towards all those who were involved in her sentence, and to all those who didn't prevent it. And thus she sweared. She set the irrevocable goal to extinguish all royal houses one day, to see them burn down by her hand. All kings and queens, Lady Idara up front, should be judged for their cruel reign, and by all of her might it was bound to happen. A few years later, the first royal house had burnt down, and she was captured, but due to Lady Idara's influence, she was not executed, but imprisoned in solitude in a far place. However, while she was preparing for her strike, she gained the fellowship that should stay true to her vision. One day, they could free her from the prison, and at that point, there was no way to stop her rage. One house after another burnt down, until only her home kingdom, led by Lady Idara, was left, and whose side the great king had taken refuge. Nazethi's raging fellows swept to the city, but spared all those who didn't oppose them. Up the hill at the courthouse, only Nazethi and a list of his fellows entered, in calm anticipation of their fate. Lady Idara and the great king stood in the high-walled entrance hall, somewhat unsettled and equally angered by their fearlessness. Nazethi drew her sword and spoke. For the unbearable injustice and cruelty to me and all my fellows had to suffer, you shall now pay with your life. Together with this house, symbol of your reign lasting far too long, you shall burn. I will erect a new order and make sure it won't fail as this one did. Nazethi, listen to me. Even though I know my fate is sealed, I have to tell you. You are not the daughter of the maid at this court, but my daughter, and Sergeant Qatar is your father. Your punishment from back then wrenches my heart every day. Please, forgive me. If it sets an end to your rage, put me to death, but please, for the good of all the people, continue this reign in peace. But how can it be? Why did you do this to me? No, I will not continue this reign as your daughter, not as the legitimate successor of this abominable dynasty. I cannot extinguish the fire burning inside me, so I will do what I should have done back then. Nazethi grabbed a torch from one of her fellows, threw bags of oil on the wooden floor beneath the Dara and the frightened great king, and set them and the entrance hall aflame. Her fellowship fled the